I think that like this is just literally another example that like the attack that people try to make that like, oh, human nature is war. Human nature is like to smash my enemy's head open before he gets mine, right? Is ridiculous. Like, you know, it's natural for people to want to work together to like live in peace with one another, right? For us to like, you know, seek out like peace, food, to have common security, all of these things, right? And it's like unusual that like the other gangs or like, you know, the police or any of these other people want to uphold this like erratic system that like does nothing but impoverish their fellow countrymen.
Like ants in a colony, organize the wealth into a socialist economy.
Okay, so at the end of this episode, episode 3, there's a quick like scrolling of like a situation with a fuel hike, but then that is like kind of the first thing that's visited in the redacted episode. So just to kind of summarize that, can we have the first clip of that? It's about 45 seconds of where I think it's Dan Cohen narrating this situation with the fuel hike, because that's kind of like an interesting development that I'd like to discuss as well. So let's show that for our audience, and then I have a follow-up question.
The gas price shot up 128%, putting basic necessities out of reach for all but a tiny minority of Haitians. Protests that had begun in August against spiraling inflation and chronic insecurity exploded. The masses took to the streets and on September 14th erected blockades. Days later, on September 19th, as the Henri regime remained obstinate, Cherizier and the FRG-9 joined the nationwide mobilization, blockading the Vera fuel terminal, one of 3 ports in the capital city that receives energy shipments. Their demand was that of the masses, that Henri roll back the hikes or resign. Still, Henri kept the price hikes in place.
So my first question to you is something that I've noticed, and maybe this is just my selective reading or my biased reading of things, but I feel like every time I hear about one of these inflation things or how expensive gasoline is, it's always in reference to Cuba or Venezuela. It's always like, oh, wow, these socialists got into power and then they, you know, nationalized stuff, and now inflation is skyrocketing and fuel is unaffordable. And look, none of these people can afford gasoline or anything like that. In this episode, they're talking about gasoline skyrocketing to $30 a gallon, which, you know, for a poor nation like Haiti is just an astronomical amount. My question is what is the logic of this fuel hike? Because I know I can say very confidently that it's not because they nationalized any of their oil industries or anything like that. So, like, you know, what is the cause of this inflation and the hike in gas prices? And then also, can you talk about, like, you know, this response from the I'll ask that follow-up after you answer that one.
Well, essentially, it's the removal of a subsidy, because gas, like in this country, in the U.S., is subsidized in many cases, in many states, and I mean taxed and subsidized. But in Haiti, it was subsidized by the state, and the U.S. and the IMF and the IDB and the World Bank were on the back of the government saying, hey, you got to cut out that subsidy, you know, let the people, you know, let the market rule, let it do. And so they cut it, and boom, it went up, as we said, 100%. So that's essentially in almost all these countries where you hear about these demonstrations against a fuel hike, and usually it is a fuel hike because the subsidies are cut under pressure from these IFIs, these international financial institutions, which don't want to see any underwriting. And it's the same thing that we're seeing, of course, in this country, where they're trying to slash, you know, every social program, and now they're probably going after Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid too.
Just neoliberalism run wild.
Right, exactly.
So the follow-up question I have to that is that I think there's a lot of like demonizing reports about the G9 and their blockade of the fuel port, you know, nefarious ulterior motives. They're stealing it so they can sell it and all this stuff. Just in your estimation of being on the ground and all this part, did you see any nefarious activity that was going on with this oil, or was this an organic, spontaneous outgrowth of public outrage that was being kind of supported by the G9?
Totally, it was. And in fact, in my speech to the UN Security Council on December 21st, 2022, people can go to the Haiti Liberté website to see that. But I underline that. I say, look, it wasn't just the barricade that the G9 put in front of the Vareux fuel station. There were 3 fuel depots in the city where gas was still coming in. The Vareux was the largest, yes, but it was going to the other ones. But there was a nationwide mobilization to lock down the country. So there were barricades everywhere. Mm-hmm. So if you had a barricade in front of the Vareux plant and a fuel truck could go a block, well, it would hit another barricade 10 blocks. I said to the UN Security Council, what's the difference if a truck can go 10 blocks or 1 block? Yeah. It's still barricades everywhere. So the G9 was just supporting the popular mobilization of the time to block all. They said, basically, the people were saying, okay, we can't get fuel, nobody's going to get fuel. And that meant the bourgeoisie too, even though they found ways to work around it.
Of course.
But that was the essence of the standoff back in 2022.
Could I ask a just small question?
Sure.
This isn't like, for me, I just know that like probably somebody out there is going to ask it. For me, right, the revolution that feeds the children is the one that gets my support, which
Michael Parenti.
I've clearly seen, barbecue. I've clearly seen him talk about like, feeding the children, but like, is he like, I guess like an ideologue? Like, has he like, talked about like literature and stuff that like he's read in regards to like any sort of like Marxism, Leninism or anything of that nature?
No, I mean, Haiti Liberté, publishes a lot of Marxist analysis, and we like to think that in accompanying this movement that they will read Haiti Liberté and learn from some of the things we put there, playing the role of the revolutionary intelligentsia that we're supposed to be playing. But he hasn't really spoken to me. I know he does read, and I've seen in these lives that he's recently done, he's much more versed and historically knowledgeable than I even really was quite aware. I thought he was speaking really just kind of off the hip, but he has done a lot more reading, and he was educated. He did go, you had to go through college basically to get a spot on the police force. So he was born in the gutter, the son of a street merchant who had nothing, and he grew up to become, quite a prominent member of the police force. And so, yes, I believe, I don't know how much time he has these days because he's running around trying to cover a lot of problems. But, he has done more reading than I at first gave him credit for.
I think that, like, even from what I've just noticed in my cursory viewing of your interactions with him, I mean, we see him giving a speech in front of Che Guevara. We see actually murals that have him in the likeness of Che Guevara. We see him wearing a beret, which is probably an ode to some of the previous revolutionary struggles of the Caribbean. And I think it kind of puts it like, Che Guevara said once, it's not my fault that reality is Marxist. And I think it's like, it doesn't matter what you read or anything like that. There's going to be something intuitive to that level of struggle that, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be taught to you from a philosophy professor or a book. These are the struggle, the material conditions that he was brought up in, that even the person you quoted, Michael Parenti, he said, oh, who's this guy Marx? I didn't, he's taking all my ideas. There is something intuitive to this, especially for someone that grows up in that environment. So that would be kind of like my view of that. But actually, this next clip speaks exactly to what you're asking, kind of, because you said he talks about feeding the children. This next clip actually shows some of the like on the ground work, that the material outgrowth of his rhetoric. So we can play that now and then have a further discussion on that.
Since our last trips to Port-au-Prince in July and August 2021, the situation has considerably deteriorated. Piles of garbage that once lined city streets have now taken them over, blocking entire lanes of thoroughfares. In some neighborhoods, residents carve pathways out of garbage for motorcycles to pass. Neighborhoods like La Saline are constantly flooded with a toxic combination of plastic waste, sewage, and rainwater. However, Cherizier's Lower Delma neighborhood, as always, is well kept, almost spotless. Police attacks have prompted residents to place barriers at the entrance to the neighborhood. Here, they have dug a trench and placed sandbags, prepared for an attack at any time. We traveled to Cherizier by motorcycle, through neighborhoods, alleys.
So, in this clip, what they're saying is like, look at all this, look at the sewers, look at the garbage. And then they show Delma 6, the area that barbecue is kind of like responsible for, in a way, or representative of. And it's very clean. And like, I want to just kind of like get your perspective on what he's actually doing. Like, I've also heard he's giving out water, he's giving out food. He has certain types of like award programs for children that do good in school and
like
things
a summer
that.
camp. It's like a month long.
Exactly.
Right.
But I'm just kind of asking, like, I think the detractors of the G9 would say like, that's all nonsense. He's just saying all that. Like, but you've been there in Delma 6 with him and you've seen the clean, like, is he walking around forcing people at gunpoint to clean the streets, or is he,
not
just
at all.
hoarding everything for himself? Like, this is what I'm not saying that I believe this, but I'm just saying I'm trying to get in front of the detractors that are like, that's all propaganda, but you were there, you witnessed it and you spoke to the man. I'm just curious, is he fulfilling those promises that he talks about?
Yes. Well, again, before he became the sort of revolutionary leader he was just making a sort of local NGO, basically called Another Vision was the name of it. Let's improve our neighborhood. Let's make a water system where people can get clean water, and let's have garbage collection every morning, and let's paint these walls, and let's put up some murals and have a summer camp, etc. So that was where it started. But the gangs which were preying on his neighborhood became a problem. And he was a cop then, and he basically got other cops to come and go to the guys and say, listen, you guys got three choices. You either stop what you're doing, or you leave, or we're going to kill you. Your pick. And they left. And so this was the beginning of his, march. And other neighborhood groups, leaders started to approach him, and they started to talk. And he's a kind of a natural born organizer, I could say. And all of this is very organic. I mean, there's a left group here in the Haitian scene who often talks about the autonomous organization of the workers. I used to kind of scoff at it and say, autonomous, this really was autonomous. This was really organic. It was coming up. Here was essentially somebody who maybe didn't, study all the texts of Marx and Lenin and Mao and Che at school, at university, but he had enough inkling of it and his own personal, concrete experience, basically, like you said before, the Michael Parenti, it was this guy Marx stealing all my ideas.
Well, this is an ideology that you should be able to take, or, evidently could take to an illiterate Chinese peasant, and they could kind of like, there's something intuitive of it that even, someone who's never read a book or never read a word in their life could be like, oh, okay, like this actually makes sense to my material conditions. It can be adapted to my life. So it's like, that should be the beauty of the science of Marxism, Leninism, is that, you know what I mean? It's not something that needs to be taught in the ivory towers. It's something that can be grasped upon by a Cuban peasant in the Escambray that's never read a book in his entire life. Right.
And one last thing on that is that I think we get a kind of a formulaic view of history. It should look like this or that revolution. But every revolution is a snowflake. It's different. Exactly. And this one is also different. And that's what I tell some of the comrades who, are having a hard time wrapping their heads around what's going on and getting through all the disinformation. No, this is a genuine thing, and we need to get behind it.
And it's fundamentally anti-Marxist to try to copy and paste some other revolution to a different set of material circumstances.
Yeah, as Marx himself often said.
I think that like this is just literally another example that like the attack that people try to make that like, oh, human nature is war. Human nature is like to smash my enemy's head open before he gets mine, right? Is ridiculous. Like, it's natural for people to want to work together, to like live in peace with one another, right? For us to like, seek out like peace, food, to have common security, all of these things, right? And it's like unusual that like the other gangs or like, the police or any of these other people want to uphold this like erratic system that like does nothing but impoverish their fellow countrymen. It's harder to wrap your head around why they would support this defunct system that has done no positive for their own people, rather than this man that's pretty much trying to create like what could be labeled as like an HOA, like in any other part of America.
You better stop right there before you get this video kicked off of YouTube, you know?
Okay, just out of respect for your time, we have about 3 or 4 more clips. Are you okay?
I'm all yours.
Oh, dude, you're the man. I'm sorry. I'm having such a good time speaking with you about this too. And me and Johnny and Phil are very passionate about Haiti, and we have been, like, you know, as somebody who represents, you know, the quote unquote anti-imperialist left, or at least claims to be the anti-imperialist left. I don't know if I represent anything. You know a little bit about Haiti, but ever since Donald Trump said those things and it became this whole thing, and I've heard so much disgusting rhetoric about Haitian people with no concept of the political development or the United States' role or France's role or any of these things. It made me sick. And that's why I'm kind of on this journey to do like a series to educate myself and our audience about Haiti. So thank you so much for that. But this next one, so because of the blockade of the fuel depot, or whatever you want to call it, the fuel port, like the UN or the State Department, you know, started to say that barbecue and the G9 were responsible for a cholera outbreak. So this clip kind of talks about it a little bit. So let's check this clip, and then I have a follow-up question for you regarding that assertion.
We visited Cité Soleil, the site of the outbreak. Trash and disease-filled water renders the neighborhood of Brooklyn inaccessible by car. We travel by motorcycle. Most residents go by foot. Canals carrying sewage and waste down from the rest of Port-au-Prince are supposed to empty into the bay just beyond Cité Soleil, but they are clogged with ever-growing mounds of garbage, leaving some 500,000 residents to live in a lake of backed-up sewage. The government no longer dredges the canals. This excavator, delivered by an NGO, sunk in the waste and now sits abandoned. Diseases like cholera, typhoid, malaria, dysentery, and hepatitis are inevitable results of such conditions.
We've been diagnosed.
So, like, you know, when you see this, like, you know, I think it was the United Nations, correct? That were like, you know, hey, there's this gang and they're blocking off fuel, and because of the lack of fuel, somehow now cholera just sprung up out of nowhere. And then listening to Dan Cohen describe that situation, it seems like, well, it seems pretty obvious why there's cholera in these places in Haiti. And
the thief crying thief, right?
So can you just talk about a little bit how ridiculous that assertion is?
Yeah, it's so ridiculous. Yeah, here they are, and now they're going to blame it on the victims. The victims are responsible for this, and they're the ones calling. And you know, it's sometimes we have to scratch our head and wonder how this machinery that can lie to us, you know, in Creole you call it jeshesh, dry-eyed, you know, with a straight face, and just tell you these absolute absurdities. And, you know, of course, people sometimes swallow them. Of course, it's getting harder and harder with social media, and a lot of people able to, in real time, push back against it. Again, Hillary and John Kerry are there saying, let's get rid of social media or get it under control. So, this is what, you know, we were trying to show there in that clip, in that segment of I think that was the redacted piece, right? Yeah.
Yes.
We do this up like ants in a colony. Organize the wealth into a socialist